I briefly mentioned this server in my workflow video, but I figured it's about time to give it a proper video. I was lucky enough to get my hands on this HP ProLiant DL380p Gen 8. It has dual 10-core 20-thread Xeons for a total of 40 cores, 96 gigs of ECC RAM, 8 hard drive slots, and over 200 watts of fans. It's a super cool server, but I wasn't aware of the years-long journey of troubleshooting and looking for obscure parts on Amazon. I grew up loving servers, watching Linus Tech Tips, and my dad even let me tour the server room at his work. I wanted to get my own, but I didn't really have a need for it. But as I got older, I started hosting Minecraft servers for me and my friends, and had more and more files to store. Above all, of course, is that a server is really cool. So in early May of 2022, I got my hands on this ProLiant, and I'm pretty sure that's how it's pronounced. After a lot of convincing, my mom reluctantly agreed to let me put the server in the garage. I warned her it would be loud, and she said it was fine, but I don't think she was expecting it to be this loud. Listen to what happens when you pull one of the fans. It makes the other fans go to max speed to compensate, and it's super loud. Anyway, I'm super grateful for this server. While we're in here, let's take a look. You can see the ducting for the fans which go over the CPUs and RAM modules, and the whole system is cooled by just that bank of fans. The heatsink on the CPUs don't even have a fan in them. The whole chassis gets pressurized with air from just those 6 fans. And it's just cool to admire the thought that went into it. The PCIe slots are horizontal and all connect with this daughterboard chassis. It can be easily removed, and you can even get a second one if needed. All of the fans are hot swappable, along with the drives on the front. The drive cages themselves even have indicator LEDs on the front, which connect via these pads on the back. They can indicate things like drive health, activity, etc. As far as the rest of the outside goes, there's VGA and USB on the front and back, so you can access them from either side, and this identifier light, which you can click and it'll blink on both sides. You can even remotely trigger that LED if you're trying to find the server in a rack of a bunch of identical servers. And around back, it has 4 gigabit Ethernet ports and this management port, which we'll get into later. Serial, VGA, all that stuff. Mine came configured with an extra 4 gigabit ports too. Oh, and these power supplies, they're super cool. They're also hot swappable. Look at what happens when I unplug one of them. Nothing. The server just keeps going. I can even go so far as removing the whole thing and nothing happens. I think you can set these up to either distribute the load evenly on the two, or have a primary one and a secondary one in the event of a failure. I've seen these set up where one was plugged into a UPS running on city power, and the other to a generator. So when the power goes out, you don't have to worry about manually switching it over. Anyway, now what I did with the server. The first thing I did was deban all the drives. For those of you who don't know, this securely wipes the drives by writing all ones, then zeros, and repeating that a few times. It makes sure there's no data left on the drive, and I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't keeping any of the previous owner's data. After that, I decided it wouldn't hurt to have a little fun with it before deploying it, so I temporarily installed Windows Server and ran Cinebench on it. Cinebench R15 scored 2,573, which you can compare to my computer with a 2nd gen Ryzen 7. And that score's not too bad. It got about 900 more than my modern CPU with 8 cores and 16 threads. Especially for running on a server, I don't think it's too bad. If I ever needed to offload some CPU heavy tasks, I could totally do it. I also hit it with Prime 95, the CPU torture test, and it didn't seem to even ramp up the fans. I didn't let it sit overnight or anything though, it was more for kicks. After a few days of messing around with the server, it was time to get it deployed. I wanted it to run TrueNAS because I did some research and it just seemed to be the best option with ZFS and all that. Something similar to Docker containers, backups, all that stuff. But I needed drives first. It initially came with 2 450 gigabyte drives, which actually spun at 15,000 RPM, which is about double the triple of what normal drives spin at. It wasn't enough space though. So I cheaped out and got some 3 terabyte refurbished drives off of Amazon. What's the worst that could happen, right? Well, I finally installed TrueNAS on it, which was a pretty smooth install. It requires a separate boot disk though, which has to be separate from the hard drives in your array. I wanted to just do it on a thumb drive, but they don't recommend it because apparently it can burn them up with the amount of logs that it has to write. There's an SD card slot on the motherboard of this server, which is kind of cool and I've never really seen that. But SD cards also aren't the nicest type of NAND flash. Ideally, it would be a 2.5-inch SSD. There's no SATA ports on the board, and there's not even SATA power sitting anywhere in here. But there was a DVD drive on the front, and I'm really not planning on using that anytime soon. And I remembered years ago hearing about a replacement for that you can actually put a 2.5-inch SSD in, and that's exactly what I did. It was probably like $10 on Amazon, and I put in the SSD and slotted it in where the DVD drive went, and the cable is even mini SATA, and it worked just fine. Supplied power, data, all that. It didn't seem too janky either. I was kind of happy about the solution. But after a week, I started getting some weird errors. I'm pretty sure this one about a drive failing was from one of the refurb drives, of course, but the seller was actually nice and swapped it out for me. The next one was about them not being genuine HP drives. This was coming from the hardware RAID card, which wasn't happy that I dared to use aftermarket drives. Said something about it not updating the activity LEDs on the front, which I don't really care about. I'll find out if something's going wrong when I can't access my data. And another downside to that RAID card is that I had to use hardware RAID. I wanted to utilize ZFS and TrueNAS, which just works way better for me and I've already had experience with it. But when I set up the hardware RAID, it only showed one drive in TrueNAS, which was the RAID array. I looked around a bit, and most people have to switch the RAID card into HBA or pass-through mode. It basically acts as nothing. It just passes the drives directly through to the software. So that's perfect. I quickly just booted Ubuntu, flashed it, and oh, it only passes through 2 of the drives in HBA mode out of the 8. But that wasn't really a problem because I just had those refurb Amazon drives. And for about a year, that's how I ran the server, and it was really good. I ran a bunch of Minecraft servers, virtual machines, and offloaded a ton of files to it. But I knew those drives wouldn't last forever. It was now April of 2023, and I kept getting these smart test failures and periods where the drives just wouldn't work. I tried saving a buck, and it didn't really work out. Well, once I got the money, I figured it was time to take it a little more seriously. One of the main problems of why I can't expand this server is that RAID card. Even though it's in pass-through mode, it's still limited to 2 drives. And I wanted to be able to have my old drives connected and the new ones, which would then allow me to continue using the old ones until I got around to transferring all the data. Also, if I ever wanted to add more drives in the future, I would have to replace that RAID card anyway. It sucked, but I ordered a proper HBA card. Luckily, they had it on Amazon, and this would basically just sit there and let me connect all 8 drives to it. It's super boring, but sadly I needed it. I also needed new drives, not refurbished this time. I didn't want to spend a ton of money on it though. Of course, I looked around on Amazon and found some cheaper Seagate 6TB drives. And these were actually rated for use in a NAS. They're red, which just means they're meant for the always-on activity and sitting around with other vibrations from other drives. And it made me feel a little better about them. However, I wasn't too sure about them. I've lost data from a Seagate drive before, so I usually try and avoid using them. I know it's probably a one-off case, lots of people are happy with Seagate, but I don't know. So I canceled the Seagate order and went out and bought some WD Reds, and I also got 8 terabytes. It cost more money, but I prefer WD. And of course I had to buy more drive cages, which was cheap on Amazon. So I spent a lot of time and money on this upgrade, but I was looking forward to finishing it up. I put the new drives in their cages and installed them. And on the other side is actually this SAS backplane, which has all 8 drives connect to it and then connects to the main motherboard with these wires. And yeah, that's correct. These are meant for SAS drives, but luckily most controllers also work with SATA. I didn't have to shell out the extra money for SAS drives, which would be ridiculous. The connectors are visually similar and work in the same port, so I saved a lot of money there. I installed the new HBA and unplugged the cables going to the RAID card. And look at that, they're too short. These cables are perfectly fitted for that exact configuration with the RAID card. So of course they wouldn't work with the new card. So back to Amazon again, where the minimum is a 10-pack of these cables, but I've already invested a lot into this, so it is what it is. I installed the new cables, which have a lot of extra length on them, which is fine, I don't care. I have 8 extras though, so don't know what to do with that. And after all of that, it has to work, right? Yes, actually. In TrueNAS, all 4 drives just show up. Took a while to get to this point, but I'm glad it works now. So that's my server. I have a ton of Ubuntu server VMs for different things, have TrueNAS jails, and have stored a ton of files on it. I don't think I'll need to expand the storage on it for a while either, though I might switch to TrueNAS Scale. I'm using Core on this one, and while I'm migrating that, I might consider just throwing more drives in there for now, just to get it over with. I don't know, that'll probably be a future video. Oh, and a couple other things. That management port on the back is so helpful. You can log in to the web interface from any ancient web browser. It's really old, so modern web browsers won't let you connect to it for security reasons or something. And I'll cut to a little overview of that. Alright, this is just going to be a super quick overview of that management, but you can see I have to use Windows 7 with Internet Explorer because nothing modern seems to display it. So then I have to go continue this website, and eventually we get right here, which is the login screen for it. The last copyright date was 2014, and I think I actually updated the firmware on it, so the last firmware version seems to be 2014. Alright, and here we are. So right here is a ton of details like the UUID and all these things. Probably have this blurred out. System health, power, that UID indicator. So if I actually go down here, I can click this and that blue light will turn on the server on the front and back. And then if we go to system information, this is kind of the coolest part of it. So you can see fans redundancy, redundant, power supplies redundant, everything else is okay. If we go to fans, you can see here's the fan speed on these. So some of these are just chilling at 18. Temperatures, look at this. It shows a graph from front to back of the server. So here's the front, so you can see different zones here. So here's the RAM DIMMs sensors. Here's the CPU sensors. You can see the hottest. And the chipset, which is also the hottest. Hard drive controller is pretty hot. And it shows the critical threshold and the good temperature threshold. Back here, system exhaust ILO, which is that chip on the motherboard for this management interface. It is measuring the exhaust temperature, which is really cool. And then here's the back view, and this is like a topographical map. As far as power goes, you can see the current power reading is 126 watts, which is kind of a lot if it's running all the time, but it's not that bad. Redundant power supplies, and then you can see the capacity for each is 460. Supports hot plug, all that. Processors, the dual Xeons there, running at 3 gigahertz, 10 cores, 20 threads, all that. Memory, you can see all the different modules, if it's their HP memory, the part number. For networking, here are the onboard ports, which I don't know why it says unknown. For storage, this is just that HP Smart Array controller that I had to put in. It doesn't have any information. It normally would have a ton of drives connected and it would show the smart status of all that, but that's all going to be handled by the actual software. ILO event log, this is cool. So it just reloaded, so you can see browser login. The onboard set clock was set to 1970, so I think I need to put a new CMOS battery in there. Server reset, restored power state to standby, network speed, server power is removed. That's probably me pulling out a power supply. You can see people logging in, all that power removed. You can see when I unplugged the fan, I was just filming that clip and it put a warning and logged it in there. And then when I put it back in, so that's kind of cool. Remote console is cool. So when you click .NET IRC, it just says, do you want to run this application? You press run and it actually downloads like this mini app. You'll see it pop up here. HP ILO integrated remote console, and look at that, this is the console on the server. This is exactly what VGA is outputting, and it's just available for me here. You can type in your keyboard, all that, send control delete. You can mount virtual drives off of image files, and this is image for like ISOs if you want to install a new operating system remotely. And then you can also simulate pressing and holding the power button and all that. You can see you can just type right in there. Virtual media is that thing I said where you can mount different devices. And then power saving mode. So I have it on power savings mode because I don't really need it to be on super high performance. And it also keeps the fans a lot quieter, which is nice. OS control mode, I think, would just let the operating system deal with that. And yeah, that's about it for HP ILO here. Back to the normal video. And yeah, that's about it for this video. I'll probably do a follow-up to this where I switch over the operating system and all that, but for now, that's about it. Hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.